So literally, 1 in every 4 people that you meet throughout the world is a Muslim. People know that it's the fastest growing religion that is around in the world, as well as here in the United States of America. Now, when I ask you, when you think of a Muslim, where do you think most Muslims come from? Would you care to guess? Middle East, most people. In fact, that's one of the most common misconceptions. Most Muslims in the world actually are from Southeast Asia. So of that 1.6 to 1.8 billion Muslims, nearly half a billion are from South Asia. And it's interestingly that less than 80 million of those Muslims collectively hail from the Middle East. So in fact, the Arab population of Muslims is the minority, not the majority of Muslims throughout the world. Particularly when you look at Asia, when you look at Africa combined, that makes up over 75%. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, no problem. Christians in the world, I believe that at this point in time, it's about parity right now between Christians and Muslims in the global population. You have about 1.6 to 1.8 billion Muslims, as I mentioned, maybe 1.7 to nearly 2 billion Christians in the world. So the projections are about 2050, Muslims will be the dominant proportion of the world's population that practices a monotheistic or organized religion. However, there is an appreciable number of those people who are unaffiliated or who don't particularly ascribe to a traditional religion or practicing religion for that matter. So again, as I mentioned, only about 20% of Muslims of the total global population are actually Arab. And this kind of gives you just a flavor of the different kinds of people that you might see that don't commonly jive with the common perception of who a Muslim is when you see someone from China, when you see someone from Iran, or Africa, or America, or Europe for that matter, or Southeast Asian. So there's a tremendous diversity amongst Muslims, and that's one of the key points that we want you to take home, that Muslims are one of the most diverse sets of people that you will find not only in the world, but here in the United States of America. So there are multiple factors that influence that, the socioeconomics of what culture the person comes from, whether they're born here in America or they're from overseas, what levels of education that they may have achieved and their family have achieved, the family and upbringing, so what kind of style or philosophy that the family has and what they want to impart on their children, and the political environment with which they have come to maturity. Again, there are varying degrees of observance between people who identify as Muslim. Some people are Muslim in essentially almost name only, and then there are those who don't have a Muslim name per se, but are very devout in practice in their observance of the tenets in Islam. And the behaviors sometimes contradict what you find in the religion. So that's to say, not every person who's a Muslim represents Islam, and vice versa. And so those stereotypes that we commonly see reinforced and capitulated in the media fail to represent the complexity of the Ummah, or the Muslim population at large. So I promised you that we would talk about Muslims in America, and the Muslims that you encounter here within the United States. And it actually shocks quite a few people that the majority of Muslims that you encounter are actually white or Caucasian in America. That makes up the dominant percentage. However, you see a lot of parity between three major groups within the United States, where there's 30% white, Caucasian, 23-ish% that's black, and about low 20% that's Asian. So right there, you have a very diverse set of Muslims that you find here in America. And that diversity is actually exceeding the general public that we find here in America. So again, Muslims that you encounter in America are amongst the most diverse population set you will find, not just ethnically, but also in education as well. And just some fun history facts, because a lot of times in the media, people will talk about Muslims as if they're just recent. So Muslims arrived in America about 20 years ago, and in fact, Muslims have been here since day one. So right here, we have the story of Prince Abdurrahim Ar-Rahman, who was a prince in his country in Africa who was bonded into slavery and was brought into the Americas, who has a very interesting story. There's actually a documentary made about his story by PBS. It's called Prince Among Slaves. I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube, so you can get it for free if you like, where he endured about 40 years of slavery here in America before he was able to go back to his home country. Maybe, I think it was about 3 or 4 months before he passed away. The story of Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb. So he is believed to have been the first documented convert to Islam in the United States of America. And in fact, he actually represented the United States in the World Islam Congress in the late 1800s. And then you have a gentleman who's affectionately referred to as High Jolly in the annals of American history. So back when we were living in the Wild Wild West, the U.S. government thought that it was a great idea to bring in camels to tackle the desert terrain. What they didn't realize is that camels and horses don't necessarily get along so well. So they brought in individuals from the Middle East, particularly High Jolly was the camel cavalry leader. And once this didn't work out, a lot of the people left, but High Jolly decided to stay and have many adventures in the West, in which the United States has actually erected a monument in his honor. So again, his name was not High Jolly, it was in fact Haji Ali. But the people couldn't pronounce his name, so they just called him High Jolly. So there's an actual monument in Arizona made in his honor in the story of the Camel Cavalry. So it's one of those stories that's a part of America's history that's been forgotten, but it's there. And so Americans today, no matter where you look, high and low, you will find Muslims interwoven in the fabric of America. Both very politicized and maybe some that are a little bit behind the scenes. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but you have, obviously, if you've been paying attention to the Olympics, several female athletes who represented our United States of America have been Muslim women who were competing in their sports wearing the hijab, or the headscarf. You also have Muslims in media, two of which are very prominent. Is Fareed Zakaria, who has a wonderful show about politics on Sundays called The Global Public Square, and Dr. Oz, who does a lot of like self-help and answering medical questions or general questions you might have. But these are notable Muslim Americans, I said, maybe a little bit behind the scene, but play very prominent roles. So, forget his name. This gentleman here was the first Muslim congressman to have been elected, and this was in, I want to say, mid-2000s. And this gentleman is the second Muslim congressman to have been elected maybe just a couple of years ago. So we've had, these are the two highest elected Muslim officials who have ever served in the U.S. government. Ingrid Mattson was the first female leader of the Islamic Society of North America. She's a very prominent scholar, not just in terms of Islam, but in intellectual circles in large. And she served in Harvard, Yale, Oxford, a host of institutions. We've had individuals that have served directly under the president in terms of being an interface for the Muslim community to the White House, and individuals who served as the head of the National Institutes of Health. And individual here is Hamza Yusuf, who is largely regarded as the most profound or knowledgeable scholar of Islam that has come or originated in the West. So there are notable American Muslims. They're kind of interwoven and intertwined both in the public sphere and behind the scenes. And so I've talked to you a little bit about who Muslims are, where they come from, and some visualizations of, so you can see them, you know, both in public and prominent positions. But we'll talk more now about the beliefs and practices of Islam. So what Muslims believe in and how those beliefs impact and influence their practices. So again, we'll talk about what Muslims believe in, how they practice their faith, and what are those goals of their beliefs and practice. So there are 6 major beliefs, or what we commonly refer to as articles of faith. And that's the belief in God. So obviously, for a religion, you believe in a higher power or a God that controls things. The belief in angels, much similar with Judaism and Christianity. You have a belief that angels are there, that kind of are there for God's will, so to speak, to carry out what he commands. We have the prophets and messengers who've delivered these holy books to different groups of people and mankind throughout history. And we believe in an afterlife, so a heaven or a hell, depending on what you've done in this life. And this belief of God's will or some destiny. So when we talk about God, there's many names that people have for God, depending on where they come from or what religious background they have. So for an individual who's Muslim, and also for those who speak Arabic but who may be Christian or Jewish or not practicing a traditional monotheistic religion, they still refer to God as Allah. So the Arabic word for God is Allah. In Aramaic, it's Allah. In Hebrew, it's Elohim. In Spanish, it's Dios. And in German, it's God. Separate names. They're used in separate groups and separate geographies, but they're referring to this higher power, this creator that created all, including us. And so this fits in this concept of monotheism, or belief in one God. And this is one of those common threads that weaves and intertwines through the Abrahamic faith traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And that's that belief in one God that Abraham, affirmed and established for people, and all those traditions that followed. And they all originated in the Middle East. So I said belief in angels. When you go through the different holy books, they all have the same angels reference. Whether you refer to them in English, Hebrew, or Arabic, they still refer to the same entities. Whether it's Gabriel, as many of us are familiar with, or Jibril, which they would say in Arabic. These entities are all there, and the names describe the entities that carry out much of God's will. And so those prophets were messengers chosen by God. These were divinely chosen individuals to carry a message from God to the people that they were in company with. And they basically taught or brought one salient theme, is that God alone should be worshipped. So belief in this one higher creator, and that people should live righteously and do good deeds. And so there are many prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, as are mentioned in other faith traditions. So we start with Adam, who we believe is the father of all mankind. Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all the way culminating with what we would believe to be the final prophet and messenger to mankind is Prophet Muhammad. So Prophet Muhammad came to Earth and was born in 570 Common Era. So well into his life, until his 40s, he was believed to be visited by the angel Gabriel when he first received the revelation, the message from God. Shortly thereafter, there was some consternation when he started talking to people about Islam, that they started to be kind of persecuted. So he sent them away from Mecca to seek refuge with a Christian king, actually in Ethiopia, about 5 years after he started receiving revelation. And so it took 7 years after that before they were able to kind of consolidate some focus and migrate to Medina. And that was a pivotal point where the table started to turn and they were able to establish Islam more prominently, and then eventually return back to Mecca. And after that, about 632 is when the time that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died. So the Abrahamic holy books, whether you talk about the scrolls or the Torah, the Psalms of David, the Gospels of Jesus, or the Quran that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought, they all talk about the same message of belief in one God and do good things. So the Quran is the holy book that Prophet Muhammad brought, and Quran literally means the recitation or to recite. And so with accompanying the Quran, you have the Hadith, which are the collections of traditions or prophetic sayings. It's somewhat similar to the Gospels in terms of the New Testament and what Luke and other companions compiled. These are the compilations of the actions and the sayings that his companions saw him do, and what he saw, and advices that he gave people. And there's a world of wealth in that. I won't get into this too much because in the interest of time. The belief in the afterlife. So again, this idea of justice, pardon if you can't see, this idea of justice is a very salient point, and in life, you reap what you sow. So this afterlife notion is what is kind of believed as the ultimate justice, in that each person will be judged based on the good they do in this life and the bad that they do in this life, based on the best knowledge that they had and what they were able to do. So the accountability of that ultimately is heaven or hell. And the last belief is God's will, or this kind of destiny that people have, and that God knows everything in creation, both now, way back to when it first started, and all the way into the future. And with that knowledge, there's the control and understanding of what will happen and what won't happen. So the spiritual support that Muslims have to enforce those beliefs are what we refer to as the 5 pillars of Islam. So Shahada, which is the first pillar, is the profession of faith, where a person says, I believe in God and that Muhammad is his messenger. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. The second is the prayer, or salah, which are 5 daily prayers. There's zakat, which is the recommended almsgiving or the charity that is similar to what you find in Judaism and Christianity. A Sawm, which is the fasting, and not just in Ramadan, but the fasting in Ramadan is required, but it's also encouraged for individuals to fast and other times during the year as well. And the Hajj, which is the 5th pillar of the religion, is the pilgrimage, or recapitulated the pilgrimage that other prophets and messengers, culminating with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, made between Mecca and Medina. So the profession of faith, or the Shahada, is literally translated as there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger or prophet of God. So let's start out with the negation of there is no God but God, and that the prophet is his messenger. And this was a very fundamentally changing thing, is that in the time, you have to understand, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to the Arabian Peninsula, most of the people were polytheists or something completely different. So they had to negate this notion of many gods. There were a small number of people who were referred to as Hanifa, or who were Christian or Jewish, that did practice a monotheistic faith. So there was a massive kind of, you have to negate all of these kind of idols before you can say and accept that God, there is this God, Allah, and that Muhammad was his messenger. The daily prayers are, there 5 different times of day, and it's a physical prayer, which might be different than what you might find in mainstream Christianity here in America, where it's more of an audible prayer, and that there's prostration that's involved, which is the prominent part of the physical motions and significance of the prayers, that submission to God. And so this physical sign of submission, this physical transition of a prominent standing position all the way to putting your head, your crown, on the floor in submission to God in direction of the where the Kaaba is, that's a physical prostration or sign of submission, in addition to the actual verbal recitations of the Quran. And this is done 5 times a day. Now, you may come into contact with a coworker or an individual that you may not know, and you see them praying. It's okay. There's no need for alarm. Just give them some space. Know that if you try to interact with them, they're not going to respond to you. And that's okay, because it's only going to be maybe about 5 to 10 minutes while they're praying. And then after that, everything is good. Funny story, once we were praying at work, me and a colleague, and another colleague came into the break room, and he was so shocked. He's like, oh my God. And he was touching us like, oh, I'm so sorry. And it was really funny because we weren't like responding to it. But he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's like, it's okay. Like, you didn't know. We didn't put up a sign that said prayer in progress, like, do not interrupt. But that's okay. That's okay. And so that prostration is a sujood. And a masjid, which we're in right now, is literally translating to a place of prostration. So masjids come in many different forms, and these are common common designs of masjids you might see throughout the world. But as you're in this structure today, you can see that many in Western Europe, North America, are repurposed buildings that had other purposes originally, but the insides are completely reconditioned and rehabbed to suit the needs of the Muslim community that occupies the space. And you have zakat, which is the required donation. So Muslims give 2.5% of their actual surplus wealth to charity. So whatever wealth you have from year to year that's more than what you need to survive, there's 2.5% of that that's given in charity. Of course, more is always welcome, but that's your minimum that you're supposed to give. And then the fasting, Muslims fast from sun up to sundown. It's a physical fasting in that you go without food and water, but you also go through a mental fast, so you have to abstain from talking about bad things. You abstain from your husband or wife if you're married. If you're a person who smokes, you also refrain from smoking, etc. Like, you avoid looking at bad things, you avoid hearing bad things, as well as avoiding those things that nourish you as well. So it's more than just saying, I'm not eating and drinking. It's a very different change of mind. And Muslims do this during the month of Ramadan, 29 to 30 days, depending on a lunar calendar. But they also do it in other times of the year, depending on spiritual needs or inclinations that they may have. And then the last pillar is the pilgrimage to Mecca, or the Hajj, which is actually coming up fastly. We have millions of Muslims converge into Mecca and Medina every year to recapitulate a lot of the accolades and the acts of both the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and other prophets that have come before him. Like I said, it's 2 to 3 million. They're always trying to increase the capacity because, as I said, there are nearly 2 billion Muslims worldwide, and every single Muslim would love to go on this. But this is the one pillar that's optional. So if you're not financially able to go on this and afford this trek, it's not something that's held against you because it's out of your ability.
Have you gone?
I have not. So I cannot afford to do this quite just yet because it's about, let's say, conservatively between 8 to 10,000. My father has gone. Yes. So so he was blessed to go actually when I was 12. So it's something that's definitely on my to-do list, but when I'll get there, God knows best. And the Kaaba is the center of where the Hajj is, so that you'll see this and the people circumambulating around it. This is believed to be the first house of worship that Abraham erected. And when you're seeing people circumambulating around it or praying towards this as the Qibla, they're not worshiping this. It's merely a sign of reverence. So the holidays that we have, Muslims have two holidays, Eid al-Fitr, which is at the end of Ramadan, which literally means the Eid of the feast or breaking of the fast, and Eid al-Adha, which is the Eid or the festival of the sacrifice. So that is directly following the end of the Hajj. So we've had this one a couple weeks ago, and this one will be a couple weeks into the future. And this one is the one where people really set it off. So if you really want some really good food besides a wedding or something, this is the one where you want to be invited to that party. Just letting you know. So that belief that I talked about, all those principles and beliefs coming together in action, and that the emphasis of just belief is not enough in and of itself. We have to have both that faith and action and practice together. And that's a strong principle that we have as Muslims that you also find in other faith traditions, such as Christianity and Judaism. And cultivating that relationship with God through positive behavior and interactions with others. So this is commonly referred to as ihsan, or excellence and perfection of character. So really, truly doing all of those principles and beliefs that we just talked about as if you are standing in front of, and you know with certainty that God is right here with you, watching you, knowing and seeing everything that you do. If you've got that going on, you know you're going to do everything to the best of your ability. That's ihsan. And so that golden rule is something that you see woven and intertwined throughout all faith traditions. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is literally in most scriptures or holy books, not just of Abrahamic faiths, but of all faiths, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Sikhism. You almost find it word for word the same. I'm not going to go through all of these because it becomes daunting, and I'd love to just open it up for questions and answers. I mean, there's obviously we know about growing Muslim sentiment, and again, you can ask questions about that. Let's see. So do you want to actually just stop for questions and answers now, or
it's up to you.
How do you guys feel? Sorry.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Would you want
20 minutes?
to continue, or would you just like to do questions and answers?
Okay, I think we have 2 out of 2, so we can do.
Okay. All right. So Islam and Christianity, a lot of times if you listen to the media, you will think that there's really this deep-seated, deep-rooted consternation and struggle and strife between the two groups, when in fact, if you look in the texts of the Quran, people fail to realize that the most mentioned prophet in the Quran is not Muhammad. It's Moses. Exactly. We have chapters. We have a chapter dedicated to Mary, mother of Jesus, peace be upon him. Like, people seem to say a lot of things, but not actually take any time to study what they're talking about. And this is a case in point. How can you think that there's this deep-seated hatred when, again, I mentioned to you before, when Muslims were having their first problems in Mecca, where did Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, send the early Muslims to? A Christian king, an Abyssinia. They sent him to Hassan. How can we have this deep-seated hatred if this is where we sought refuge in the world? It doesn't make sense. Again, we have so many shared beliefs and practices. This belief in one God, prayer, giving alms and charity, doing good, the value of our neighbors, and common well-being. If we have so much in common, how can that really truly be the issue? Again, when we look at what we have in common, we find we have much more in common than we do different. Honesty and truthfulness, everybody values that. These are basic human values that we have. We're not so different. Respect for the earth and its creatures. When we do things, particularly as Muslims, there's a particular way in which we do it. Even down to when we're dealing with the animals that we rely upon for our food, there's an especially particular way in which we procure the meat from those. And that's not just the slaughtering or the way they meet their death, but from the time they're born and raised all the way to that point. There's a very particular way in which that's supposed to happen. There's a very particular way in which, if we're engaged in a conflict, how we deal with combatants in conflict. We don't engage with people who are not involved in a conflict. That's not following Islamic rules and principles of engagement. So with that, I actually will end with going back to the beginning and saying, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I'm not going to quiz you and say what is you supposed to say back to me, but if you do remember it, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Absolutely. And I will say wa alaikum assalam to you. So thank you very much for your attention. I would love to welcome any questions and answers that you might have. So thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for turning the light on. I love this guy. He's proactive. I didn't ask him, but he did it very well. So now it's your time. Question and answers. We have like a 15 minutes, but we can go longer. So I know there's a lot of questions here. We have new guests. So thank you for coming. The gentleman there as well. No, you. Love to have you. So if you want to have any questions, please go ahead and just raise your hand and I'll give you a microphone. Yes.
I think the biggest question that brought me here is how do we, as just community members, decrease the stress that's been, I mean, there's a demonizing of this religion, and I don't think it's shared broadly, but I do think it's gripped a lot of people, and I'd like to know how to do a little bit to just decrease it.
Okay, so the question was, how do we de-escalate the tensions that have risen to all new highs right now? I think forums like what we have here today are a great start, but it's more personal and it's deeper than that. So one of the statistics that we didn't have a chance to share in this presentation is that it's something nearly 70 to, actually it's I think 80+ % of Americans don't know a Muslim. Sadly, we're less than 1% of the American population. So I could see people not actually knowing a Muslim because we're only, less than 3 million or around 3 million Muslims in the entire country. So what we have to do is be more proactive in meeting our neighbors, and not just here, but where our neighbors are, and interacting and putting a face on Islam here in America. Because when you know me as your neighbor, it produces an effective narrative against whatever is put on the media, whatever someone else says. They're like, I know a Muslim, I know this guy, he's not like that, So that is the most effective counter narrative I believe that can exist in countering that. But instances like this are fantastic starts. Establishing stronger ties with our neighbors, programs that are actually geared towards anti-bullying, anti-Islamophobia, and then our neighbors and our allies going out and saying, hey, I know a Muslim. They're not like that. Whenever you hear a friend or someone, I went to an open house, and in fact, you should come with me to another one, and you can hear it from the horse's mouth. I think those are key fundamental things that will dispel a lot of common misconceptions and just outright lies.
You can ask as many questions as you want. Please. This is the fun part. Yeah.
This isn't a question, but I understand what you're saying. I was stereotyped to think about a person of Muslim religion. And I had opened my house to have an exchange student come. And he seemed very personal and friendly, but I didn't realize I was stereotyped. Oh my goodness, this is really dangerous. What have I done? And then when he come to our house, it was like it changed my entire perspective and no one could explain.
Thank you very much. And I think those are so critical. Being a host for exchange students, and that's a two-way, and it's an exchange. It's not merely one way. They learned a lot about you as well. You know, when people come and visit the United States, they're learning a lot about the culture and what happens here and what this place has to offer. And you're learning about what they have to offer as well. So it's a two-way street.
Thank you. We had a exchange student bring his host family here a few open house ago. It was amazing. Really, he said they came to learn more. So I think we have a good ambassador out there.
Absolutely.
Please do ask questions. This is the fun part.
Yeah. And no question is off limits.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
can ask anything. We're literally we're good with any question.
Well, I think we have
Totally.
thick skin, as you say.
But really, this is how we learn and how we exchange and how we get familiar with each other is when we drop the pretense and we feel comfortable in just saying, hey, I just don't know about this. I'm curious about this. Shoot it.
I think she has questions.
I think it. I
See,
didn't think about it.
Are you? Come on, you look like you got something.
Yeah,
I'm Muslim.
Yeah.
There you go.
Good.
I'm going to white.
Great.
Mashallah.
Wonderful.
That's great.
I have a personal question.
Yes.
So when you see what's going on in the media, and you see, you know, even people who are running for office, say the kind of things that you're saying, what is the first thing that Muslims? And that's personal, of course.
Personal, of course. So the question was, whenever we see something in the media, what is the first thing that comes to mind? And there's a couple of different circumstances. So whenever you see some kind of a catastrophe or you see some kind of horrible thing, your first reaction is, please God, don't let it be a Muslim associated with that. Please don't, please don't let this be what's happening, because whatever relationships or whatever progress had been made is completely set back, way more than whatever progress was made. So that's the first, like in a political or geopolitical event that happens, that's my first reaction. My second is, okay, what are we going to have to do? What kind of press release, what kind of, media event is going to happen to address this? How many apologies are going to have to be made to try to do a mea culpa for what happened? And it's unfortunate because we typically have to answer for what we do as individuals. We typically don't have to take on more than what we as a person are owning. However, in this circumstance, each individual has to take on the burden of 1 billion, and that's simply more than any person can endure. So it's a bit of a bittersweet thing in that I always hope that there is progress being made and that there will be people to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not fair. And you do see that. And so you do see some people in the media say, hey, you can't judge nearly 2 billion people for the actions of this small number of people. And sometimes that gets poo-pooed, and sometimes it catches traction. And I just like to see that progress being made. I love to see individuals showcasing the diversity of Muslims, because the sooner people realize that not everyone is the same, the sooner we get away from this narrative of all of these people do this, because we're not all doing that. Because if say even 25% of 2 billion people were doing some nefarious things, the world would be a drastically different place. So that's always how I react to it.
Thank you. Yeah, he's born, he's here, so he has nowhere to go. For me, if you ask me, I always look for the cheapest airline ticket one way without connection in Europe. So far, I haven't found it, so I'm stuck
I
here
was
as
going
well.
to say, I'm like, I don't think that exists, bro.
Yeah. So again, it's very stressful, and as I said, we just think, what can we do just to, that's not us. I mean, it's said that we have to answer to somebody else, and no one else is doing it for what happened in Colorado Spring. For example, the murder happened in Colorado Spring for the parenting hood. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, I know.
As a non-Muslim, I point out that, Christianity has that same problem. any religion has that same problem. There's always going to be a group that abuses that religion to be violent, but they're not really being religious. And so, you know, it's throughout history. I understand how political it is right now, but you're right that people have such a stereotype about Muslims. That's why the problem is more here. People say all the time, well, why don't people in the mosques take care of it? It's such an unrealistic
It's
view.
very unrealistic, but we also, there's two sides. Like I said, it's a two-way street. We have to do a better job, and we need people on the outside community to do a better job as well. We can police things a little bit better. We can tidy some things up in-house, like every family. There's always a little bit of funny business in every family. But when outside family deals with it, we could do a better job from that side coming in as well.
Yes.
I just want to say something really, so my son is Muslim, and, I don't like talking these things.
No, you're good.
Anyway, Islam saved his life. And last week we had to move, and my husband is disabled and cannot do very much, and we moved in the same apartment complex. So it was a really hard move. And about 6 or 7 of his friends from here, some of which we don't even know, came and helped. And so I just want to say that, you know, to me, Islam is wonderful, and all Muslims are wonderful, and I have nothing against anybody. It's saved my son's life, period. And all the people that I've met here have been wonderful, and I mean, whenever I have thanked them, I tried to give them money last week, they said no, and they kept telling me that it was their duty, and I said, it's not your duty, but they did, they said it was their duty, and I just, I know that my son has had Christian friends that have not felt that way, so I just want to say that meant a lot to me. So, and on an off note, we had a couple of Mormon brothers, or elders, that live in the apartment building across from us that actually came and worked with you guys too. So it was quite interesting. We were very well represented that day last week. It was last Saturday, so it was really cool. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very
Touching. Man, you're getting it, man. You are very popular now. We should make you an email. Because of the house, the car. I mean, you're not married, right? With a wife too, so. Another question, please? It's a saving of life or bringing somebody back to take advantage of his life. Doesn't matter. It just, and what she said about helping, this is the FBI calling now. Just kidding. No, it's not FBI. You are fine, that's okay. So it's really, when we said it's our pleasure to do these things and people volunteer, it's truly pleasure. And if you go visit a Muslim family and invite you for food, they must almost kill you. Eat. You don't eat. I had somebody get mad. I think my kids when I go overseas, or my mother-in-law, or somebody I know, they get mad, they keep asking. So they're very helpful and generous, and they do mean it. And I didn't know about the move. Otherwise, I would come help as well.
Sure you
Or send my boy to help. Any other questions? I mean, I'm sure there are other questions. Please.
Greedy for those who do good.
Yeah, she's asking for my mom. My daughter.
I just wanted to say, I think it takes two sides, because being familiar with someone is important, but there's a lot of close attitude between people wanting to get to know Muslims, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Even my own family is still different somehow.
Yeah. But in terms of natural interactions, I guess, hit tea, coffee, neighbor, barbecue, volleyball games, or whatever, block park. Like, those natural interactions are the best way for people to get exposure. In the old times, in the origins of the religion, people learned about Islam through business interactions. People doing trade and traveling throughout the lands, they became familiar and enamored with how honest and how dignified the Muslims were. And that was one of their best selling cards to draw people into the religion. So just having that ihsan, that great character and excellence in everything that you do, that's the best calling card in my opinion.
And that was my experience. It felt like Jesus Christ walked into my house. He's like 24 years old. He's not like a lot of other people.
I want to know this person.
It was
Abdul.
Rahman.
Abdurrahman?
Good.
Oh, is he that one? No.
No,
His
he's
name
back
is.
in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, he's back,
And
okay.
he says, in our country, if it's a friend, it's a friend for life. And
Yeah.
he still keeps in contact with his
Yes,
over 20
that's
years.
true. That's true. I don't know if that's a live broadcast or not. What? That's the Mecca, the Hajj piece of it. So if you see behind it, you can take a look at there. It's a very interesting, very beautiful place to visit. So another question. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna call my husband out. So I'm not Muslim, but I want to know, where do I go besides the internet? I know he's trying to expose him to the Quran, and how do I support him in his journey? It's hard to talk to him because he's so passionate, and so sometimes someone that's so passionate doesn't explain it in a way that I can receive it. And so where can I go besides the internet? Because the internet will feed you all kinds of things. Like, is there a number, or do I just show up? I don't, this is my first time, so I'm glad he brought me here. But prior to, I didn't know where to turn, to try to be supportive.
So if I'm not a doctor. It is where I can say there are people who they were in your situation before they revert to Islam. We say revert. So, anyone volunteer to answer this question?
Yeah, you can come to the masjid. You can come to woman activities. We have a lot of things, and I can introduce you to some people. You can ask us, and if you find somebody who you click with, have like a buddy system, and they can be, I don't understand this, or what do you guys think about this, and I'm a revert to Islam, and I know a lot of others who know the journey. And then there's also many people who are not, and they were born into Muslim. They'll have a different, way of looking at things. So you'll have a resource of people, and I know ICNA also, they have an 800 number.
We represent ICNA here, so we help the new Muslims, and there's a lot. There's quite a few. I'm someone who came from a different religion. I'm someone who came from a different religion as well. So I know the path and the experience that you can have when you come to a different religion. So ICNA is here to help out the people who are really interested in becoming Muslims and how to move on and deal with all the issues that can come with that change.
You have a toll-free number also? Yeah. 1-877-YISLAM.
Yeah, 1-800 or 877-YISLAM as website. But for the husband, be patient. That's all what you can do. Be patient. I'm telling you something that I wish all of us do. Just be patient and be the role model, which is not easy. And she will watch you, and she will make it easier for her. It's like you have to wait for 9 months for the baby to come out. So you have to wait. Make it natural. Yeah. So I'm hinting. Okay, great. Any other question, please? Oh yeah. Sorry. You can take as many questions you want.
Oh, I can. Oh, I wanted to ask, we're aware of the refugee problems, all those poor people in Europe. And is there anything more we can do in Denver to help find places for them?
Yeah. So Like, so
Denver has been very proactive in terms of refugee and refugee resettlement and resources for those individuals. So in fact, the youth here in Denver organized an entire collection for basically the entire Muslim community in Colorado to send over shipment containers, like those shipload containers filled with goods to help the people. Secondarily, there's organizations that are here that are playing a role in the refugee resettlement that is actually happening here as well. Third, there are a number of Syrian refugees, not Syrian refugees, but individuals of Syrian origin that are here in Denver. They're very passionate about this, that organize, events, ways to help allocate resources to those individuals directly through organizations like Midday Syria. So there's a wealth of opportunity here for you to help with that in many different ways.
Could you help hook me up?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you can start by emailing us, Denver Islamic Society's website, and Brother Murad is over there. He's the office manager, and just you can tell us what kind of help you can provide. We have seen so many type of help. The last one I saw, somebody wanted to donate a car to a Syrian refugee. Somebody, they have furniture in the house. Some people say, just tell me how I can help. So you just tell us how you can help, because everybody has a different way to help, and absolutely we'll connect you with the right needy person.
Yeah, I'm a pastor of Christian community in Broomfield, but we're trying to connect with our wider community. And that's such a pressing need, obviously.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's just,
yeah,
we're coming around different places, but we want to come alongside.
Yeah, there are some organizations that have been non-Muslim as well, so it's all.
Well, I'd rather, work with Muslim organizations because it would ease it'd be more.
Yeah, I have seen some of them came here. Sometimes you see them just tired, broken, because everything behind it just sad. So, sure, we look forward for your email.
Okay. I'll try to get in touch with you.
Yeah. Any other question, please? My fit with that. How much fit with it? I think unless you insist you want to ask more questions, I will close this part of the session and we go to the back there and start, there's some sweets, some baklava. Yeah, that's the only reason, that's the only reason I come here. So, so yeah, unless you have any questions, please, and it's been a pleasure to us to have you. We are here until 5, like formally, but if you want to say more good, we're more than happy. Any other question, please, you can grab a Muslim or a Muslim and say, yeah, I met a Muslim. You met a Muslim, but you're a great Muslim. You can, yeah.
I say I met her.
Muslim. So thank you, brother. This is really one of the best presentations I have seen since November. We had a wonderful presentation. Sometimes we had like 80 people, 70 people, but really the pleasure is the same. 4 people, 80 people, really this kind of interaction, and people live with the question answer, that's the best of it. So without further ado, if a Muslim is ahead of you, remove them. Okay? Especially the teenage.
VIP.
VIP. So thank you. Please join.